Here we are. Hi everyone, welcome to Women in Business, where every week I have the opportunity to introduce you to a woman in business. But she is not only a woman in business, and she is not climbing ladders, nor is she smashing ceilings, but she is diverting barriers to her success and helping you do the same. So today I have the great opportunity to introduce you to a fantastic lady, Dr. Laura Sicola. And Laura, I am just so delighted to have you here today.
Thank you, Carol.
Just amazing. Vocal Impact Productions is your company.
Yep.
And that's what you help others create, vocal impact.
Yes.
And this show is Women in Business, and we all know the importance of having vocal impact and leadership in the business world. I am a lobbyist, so I have to have a voice for others.
Sure.
It's really important that I speak for other people in the way that they want me to. And I was also a domestic violence crisis counselor. So I've spoken on behalf of women that, were kind of silent for a very long time.
Sure.
So I've been influenced by a lot of people, not necessarily just women, but people in my life, and I am sure that you have as well. And this show is really about you and about who inspired you and who you're inspiring now because of that. So let's go down memory lane and talk a little bit about, maybe, some either experiences or people in your past. When you look back, you say, yeah, I never thought about that, but they really made an impact on my life.
I think one of the earliest influences for me as far as leading eventually to where I am now is my grandmother. My grandmother was born in Chile.
Oh.
And she was, every now and then at Christmas time, she would come to visit us in New Jersey. I'm originally a Jersey girl. And I would hear her on the telephone. I was raised in a very monolingual English household. My mother doesn't remember any of her Spanish. They immigrated when she was very, very young. And my father was Italian, so Italian-American, also English only. So foreign languages were not part of my household. But when Grandma would come at Christmas and be on the phone talking to her siblings in Santiago, I was 4, 5, 6, and I just remember watching and listening to this magical incantation, this secret power that Grandma had, and thinking to myself, I was actually quite green with envy. Like she had this secret power that I didn't have, and I felt excluded by it. Not in a mean sense, it was just like, ooh, someday I want to know what Grandma's saying. I want that magic power. I want to be able to talk like that. And of course, the magic power is what the rest of the world knows as Spanish, but for me at 6, I think that was probably the first goal I ever set for myself, is that I want to be able to do that. I want to understand it, I want to be able to use it and be understood. And my mother likes to say that I was the only 6-year-old she knew who learned how to speak fluent Pig Latin by self-taught, and I think that was my first step towards that. And it just led to the goal and the focus of really wanting to help others be understood, which is really the focus of my work.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. Yeah, su abuela, right, in Spanish. Yeah, I too am very enchanted by language. It's beautiful, and it's a curious thing. Because people are communicating, and you want to know what they're saying, right? So that's amazing. So you were influenced by your grandmother, and then when it was time to go to college, were you still fascinated by this language?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah?
Absolutely.
So tell me more.
Foreign languages and cultures were always an interest. When I was 16, my 16th birthday, my grandmother decided to take another trip. She was living in the US at that point, but she decided to take a trip to Chile. And because I was studying Spanish in school, she took me with her.
Oh.
And that was my first really big international experience. For the 6 words of Spanish that I knew at that point, it was so amazing to experience another culture, to live within another language, the foods and the music they listened to, and just that desire to be more effective, to be better understood, to make myself understood. And it was just so much fun. I remember thinking, I don't know what kind of job I would ever do, but I know that I have to do something with language and culture and speech and communication. That was the first moment of clarity that I think I ever really had as far as something regarding the color of the career trajectory. And it's been there ever since. So in college, I decided to study Japanese because I was already at that point pretty fluent in Spanish. And I thought, well, let me pick up another language while I have the time to really dedicate to it intensively. And in my then somewhat masochistic 18-year-old brain, I thought to myself, well, I could do another Romance language, but I could pick that up later. Let me try something more challenging now while I can do it with this intensive focus. So I picked Japanese, and I got what I asked for, to say the least. There's that lesson in there, right? Watch what you ask for. You might just get it. So,
Big
but it loved
difference.
it. Loved it. Very different.
Wow.
But just as much fun.
Wow. So then when you were in college, you decided to go on for your PhD, a doctor.
That was years
right?
later. I remember, the irony is I remember graduating with my bachelor's degree, and during the graduation ceremony, watching the PhDs walk up to get their diplomas with their beanies on, their tams, and the long flowy robes, and thinking to myself, you guys are nuts. There's no way you could pay me enough money to spend a gazillion more years in grad school. I wanted out of the student life. I wanted a job. I wanted an income. I wanted a life. I was done with school. So the fact that I went back like 3 more times for a teaching credential and a master's degree and then a PhD, every time I did it, I thought to myself, you're kidding me, right? I'm really going back to school. I'm really doing this. There was always a reason for it, but it was never something that had been initially part of the plan. So as they say, life has a way of, what is it? Life's what happens while you're busy making other plans?
That's right, that's right. And I believe, just knowing you briefly, that you're a lifelong kind of curious learner. You know, I myself love to read and study people and whatnot. So ultimately, your curiosity definitely led you down some very interesting pathways.
They have.
You know, so a lot of the women and men, you know, that are viewers of this show, look at someone like you and they say, wow, you know, that's amazing. And sometimes we make it look so easy. You know, for most of us, to have a TV show like this or to get up in front of an audience and speak is terrifying. You know, you did a TED Talk. For most of us, that is just terrifying.
It is, but I have a 4-word secret for confident public speaking. And this doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter what audience you're speaking to, doesn't matter whether you've got 2 minutes or 2 hours, it always comes down to this. Ready? It's not about you. And this is where the fear comes from on the other side of it, because where does that fear come from? It's not really a fear of public speaking. It's a fear of public judgment, public scrutiny. So for people who get nervous at public speaking, it's because their brain goes into that death spiral of what if questions, right? What if I make a mistake? What if I forget what I want to say? What if I sound stupid? What if they disagree with me? What if they ask a question I can't answer? What if I ask a question and they think I should already know the answer? You know, it's all of that what ifs. But the audience isn't really coming in with the goal of seeing if they can shoot holes in every possible argument you try to make. An audience in almost any situation, whether it's during a meeting, whether it's during a pitch or at a conference, watching television, they're all thinking to themselves one key question. What am I going to get out of this?
Right.
What's in it for me? And when you're able to think to yourself as the speaker, okay, what they really want is something that will make their lives better, something they can implement right away that will help them to be more successful, more confident, more effective. Okay, well, if I'm the expert giving the talk in the first place, then that's something that I should be very able to do. Tell them something they need to know, something I think will be useful for them. If I focus on giving them a value as I'm talking so that they get what they need out of this, then the focus isn't on me at all. If they're happy with what they receive, by default, they will be happy with me. And that's where the focus really needs to be.
That's great. That's great information. And you know, so I want to go back again, you know, to college, and you coming to the realization that, you know, it has to be communication because it's a natural for you and you're fascinated with language. So tell me more about that process.
meaning for how I got from college to here.
Yeah.
This kind of a path, but I started out as a public school teacher where I also did not expect to go, but working with more immigrant communities in the inner cities of Los Angeles, doing bilingual programs and going from there into teacher education was the focus, which is why I moved to Philadelphia, because I wanted to be faculty someplace at a university and train teachers with the knowledge that I frankly didn't get formally, that the training that I needed to be more effective working with the more underserved, multicultural, multilingual populations in the schools. And as part of the many years that it took me to get this degree, I ended up doing a lot of work with international professionals, international students, international faculty members, because I had the multilingual background. And it wasn't just about translating, but it was understanding the challenges of learning and being effective in a foreign language that my first consulting job came out, which was working with the international professionals, the expats here. Think about who's in your IT departments. Think about who are your risk analysts at banks, who are the number crunchers, who are the computer programmers, and more. But especially in those real tech jobs, there are people who are highly skilled, highly educated, and highly fluent in English, but often not as effective as they want to be for a number of reasons. And I had the knowledge to help them figure out how to close that gap. And then one thing led to another, and the Americans started saying, we're not so good at communicating either. Just because we're native speakers
right.
doesn't mean by default you're a good communicator. So it expanded from there, and here we are.
Unbelievable. So we have to take a little break, but we'll be back. So don't go away. We have more to share with you. Hi everyone, welcome back to Women in Business with my special guest, Dr. Laura Sicola. And we were last talking about, the unfortunate loss of heritage, and when you grow up in a family where several languages are spoken, but then there's a stigma, you're in America, you should speak English, especially way
only
back when,
English,
only
right.
English. Way back when it was, it just is such a loss. But I think what's great is that you decided, I want to go ahead with this. And even though Spanish was something that you were enchanted with, you were like, I want something a little more challenging. Japanese,
Right.
And there's a common thread, with many of the women in business that come on this show. It's a take charge kind of attitude that I can do that, and I already mastered that. So even if I don't know where that road takes me,
right.
I'm going to forge ahead. And I think that happened with you also, not really knowing how you were going to transform the education and your curiosity and interest in language into a career.
Yeah.
That's a zig or a zag, whichever part of the Z you're on.
Right.
That it's uncharted territory, language and you know what you know, but as far as business.
How to build a business around it is a whole different animal.
Yeah. So what I want to talk about is, in general, women in leadership. And for many, many years, and I know this to be true, whether it's in politics, with very few women having the courage to be able to step up to the microphone and speak effectively and strongly about their convictions. Same within maybe families that did immigrate, and maybe they're victims of domestic violence, or in situations where I've had to have a voice for others. I love what you're doing, because what you're doing instead is teaching them how to fish. You're giving them the power in their own voice. And that could be not for somebody that's troubled. It could be for a woman in middle management that's really looking to advance her career, or a current CEO. It doesn't have to be a woman, but it is Women in Business, this show.
Sure.
So much attention was paid over the past 20 years to women that really wanted to get on boards. Catalyst did a lot of research, and even now there are not that many women on boards. There's a little trend to sneak a few in here and there because it looks good. Okay?
The optics, sure.
And you said something very profound to me before, and I'd like for you to share that with the audience, your thoughts about that.
Remind me which.
So you said it's one thing, to have a seat at the table, right?
Sure. So we had talked about the diversity and inclusion label, and I just heard, and this is not something I can take credit for, but it spoke a lot to me, the idea that diversity is ensuring that women and minorities and whoever else has a seat at the table, but inclusion means that they also have a voice when in the seat.
Right.
So how do you find that voice and make sure that it gets heard is really the question that most people are struggling with.
Right. And I will tell you that we did have an amazing leadership conference, 400 women, brought all kinds of amazing women together.
Sure.
However, from it, we learned, the Latina population in particular, and we were speaking about your grandmother, they said to us, we don't really have the skill set. We are underpaid, and a lot of things happen to us that are detrimental, but we want to learn. We want to better ourselves by getting to that table.
Sure.
How do we do that? How do we empower ourselves? And that is what you essentially are doing. As we've said before, you wake up in the morning and you speak. You go to bed at night, you say good night, right? We use our voices all the time.
Yeah.
But women in particular, I think, really have trouble roaring.
Sure. I think a lot of the challenge is that women tend to give ourselves something of a false binary choice in many situations, like either I can be myself or I can talk to these people in a way that they will understand. Either I can be nice or I can be strong and authoritative. Either I can be X or I can be Y, and they're both unsuccessful options, but it's because none of life is black and white, other than maybe a demographic checklist, check which box, and even those are completely false in the way that they're created. So what we have to really make sure that we're doing is recognizing the grayscale in speech style. So when you think about what does it mean to speak authoritatively, what does that sound like? What is the sound of authority? It doesn't have to mean, we talked about commanding versus demanding respect previously. So being strong shouldn't be about saying, well, I want this, you're going to do it my way, you'll listen to me, versus being nice and using upspeak so you don't sound too witchy and making sure everybody's okay and trying to get everybody to agree with you. And why are those my only options? When we give ourselves those false choices, we tend to pigeonhole ourselves in a way that doesn't allow us the opportunity to learn another language, whether it's Spanish or Japanese, or learn IT, or learn to speak finance, or learn to speak to the senior executive level versus the vendors versus new employees. When you learn that a new group of people, however you want to label that group, tends to speak to each other in a particular way, you can either say, well, that's not me, in which case you're saying, well, okay, if you're drawing a line between them, then you're not going to give yourself access to speak to them. Or you can say, I need to figure out how they interact with each other and what they are able to hear, what resonates with them, and then learn that skill, add that language to my repertoire. It's not about, I'm going to fake it or be inauthentic to learn to speak that way. But as soon as we tell ourselves that, oh, it's inauthentic for me to have to learn to speak that way, we immediately cut ourselves off at the knees from being able to connect with that new group. So we have to change our language, meaning change the labels that we're using to describe these things, because they get in our heads and they tie our hands behind our backs.
Yeah, it just became clear to me that the upspeak versus the speak up.
Yes, that's a beautiful way to put it. I never thought about that distinction.
But as I listen to you, you do that quite a bit. Like you'll reverse, and so I'm following your train of thought as we're going along, and I'm very curious about how we could change that. The upspeak versus, or the upspeak with an arrow to speak up. So maybe that's something we could talk about another time.
That's a great play on words. Thank you for that. I'm going to steal it.
Good. So I want to talk about influence and speaking to influence, and I'd love for you to pick up your beautiful book and talk a bit about that and mastering your leadership voice.
That's the book title. So the book speaking to influence, mastering your leadership voice is really just an opportunity for anyone out there who's got a little bit of time, and it's available in Audible version if you're like me and realize that it's sometimes hard to get through paper, but if you can listen in the car on the commute, that's when you can really take in some great information. But the idea is for anybody who wants to have more influence, who wants to be more effective communicating with diverse audiences, to learn how to do that, learn the skills, very simple skills, how to communicate in a way that allows you to pivot, allows you to style shift a little bit from group to group to make sure that you're getting through to them in a way that they need to hear you so that you can get the response from them that you want and have the influence that you aim for in the end to get those results. So that's the focus of the book. And it is very much a how-to manual. End of every chapter has activities, steps to follow, worksheets. It's very much a DIY, but it's the same as working with me.
It's amazing. Yeah, and I guess it's a great starting point, for somebody that's not familiar. And I think about myself using my voice all the time, and I told you I was so excited about you being here because I really hadn't given it so much thought. And you really do provoke that kind of thought. So I'd like to speak a little bit more about your business as well.
Sure.
So vocal impact. We all would like to have more vocal impact. And for the woman, we it's women in business, but
Sure.
there's also men out there. But in particular, I think for women that want to have more vocal impact, are there a few tips that you can give them?
One is just to not feel like you have to talk like a man. And frankly, there's no single construct about, well, this is how men speak and this is how women speak. From team to team, from industry to industry, from vertical to vertical, there's a lot of variation. But you can still learn to pivot, as we discussed a moment ago, in ways that will allow you to be effective with those groups, but still being authentic. I think one of the most important, we talk about redefining terms that we need to redefine is the concept of authenticity. Because I think under it all, we have this misconception that being authentic means you have to always be comfortable. But by definition, anytime you're going to learn something new, there's a learning curve. And learning curves are inherently about stepping out of your comfort zone to learn those new skills. So if I'm not used to working in IT, or if I'm not used to working in agribusiness, I'm gonna have to go through a little bit of a learning curve to understand what's unique to this new client, and to learn to speak that language more effectively. It doesn't mean I'm being inauthentic. The authenticity is my desire to connect with them and to learn that language. Just like when I'm learning to speak Spanish, learning to speak Japanese, I may not be comfortable in the language, I may not even be very skilled at it yet, but my desire to connect with people who do speak that language fluently is authentic. And that should be the driving force and the motivation, at which point, okay, you may stumble a little bit, it may be a little awkward until that learning curve sort of flattens out. But don't let that discomfort in the learning process convince you erroneously that you're somehow being inauthentic. If so, again, that's where you chop yourself off at the knees and limit your own potential.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and I know there are so many barriers, as we speak in the beginning of this segment, to your own success, that you really have to jump over those hurdles. And so financially, I have to speak up and negotiate a salary raise.
Sure.
I'm afraid, I want to say what I want, but I'm just afraid,
Sure.
So there's different voices inside of women, men, all of us. So when there's that fear, of speaking up, and we tend to do all kinds of things when that happens, are there some tips that you could give for reducing the anxiety? So it could be for negotiating a raise, it could be at an interview, it could be being on this TV show, it could be doing a TED Talk, which you did, which requires great bravery, to get up there and
More
speak.
discipline than bravery, but yeah.
We talked about discipline, right? About running, and
Sure.
that it's an exercise that you have to practice, just like you do everything else. Go to the gym, work your muscles, even though we don't like it, but when we're done, what do we say?
Right. For me, and we talked about exercise off the set earlier, but I run on a pretty regular basis. I don't like running. It's just, it's free, it's easily accessible, it's always available. So I do it first thing in the morning when I wake up, but I really want to hit the snooze bar when the alarm goes off. But I know that if I don't, in 45 minutes to an hour, I'll be mad at myself for the rest of the day that I didn't. So it's not that I like running, I like having run.
Right.
And I like that knowing that I checked off that box, that I completed that task. Now I can eat what I want, now I can relax. Whereas if I don't do it, I'll be mad for the rest of the day that I didn't, and I'll say I should have run. So I like the feeling of having run, so I have that discipline to go and do it, even if I don't like the feeling of running itself. So that it's the same thing with learning anything else. You want to know that you like the feeling of having done it.
Right, and once you've done it, it's very much as we get dressed, right? Like,
Right.
you could slip that necklace on or slip the bracelet on very easily because you did the work. It's an accessory now to your brand.
Sure.
That you've worked hard at, and you
Yep.
could proudly put it on. Many of us aren't practicing, or we're not really using the discipline, and I think your service is really, really needed. I thought, this is more like if somebody's going to give a speech, or they would need that.
Oh, that's only a very narrow.
Right.
Every conversation you have, one-on-one, on the telephone, on TV, or in front of 1,000 people, it always matters. One more term I'm gonna redefine, and that's the definition of public speaking. Public speaking is anytime you're talking to someone besides yourself. Now, that might be the best conversation you have all day, but ultimately, any conversation is public speaking, so you have to be mindful, you have to be deliberate, intentional, and powerful in the way that you deliver that message.
Yeah, words matter,
Yes.
and thank you. You've taught me so much about words in general and how important they are, for our brand or just
Yes.
in our everyday lives. So how can our audience find you?
Sure. You can go to my website, which is vocalimpactproductions.com. All sorts of resources available, from free videos to links to the book, etc., as well as other upcoming events that I'll be hosting in the Philadelphia area and elsewhere. And of course, you can go to Amazon to pick up a copy of the book, whether it's in paperback, in Kindle or ebook edition, or Audible, Speaking to Influence, Mastering Your Leadership Voice.
Thank you so much. You have certainly
Thank you.
influenced me today, and I am sure our entire audience, because this is just, more and more I realize just how important it is to communicate. So thank you for coming here and communicating with us.
Thank you for having me, Carol.
And thanks to all of you for joining me every week on Women in Business. And I look forward to seeing you again next week. Have a great weekend, everyone. Take care.